Part 1, I chose A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. Her husband Torvald thinks her careless and childlike and often calls her his doll. When he is appointed bank director, his first act is to relieve a man who was once disgraced for having forged his signature on a document. This man, Krogstad, is the person whom Nora has borrowed her money. Some themes from A Doll's House would be the sacrificial role of women, parental obligations, and unreliability of appearances. Nora had to sacrifice a lot of things for her husband, including her kids, which really is important, and as well as Mrs. Lindy found it really necessary to abandon Krogstad, her love, and marry a richer man. The nanny also had to abandon her own child to support herself by working as Nora's caretaker. Parental obligations. Nora, Torvald, and Dr. Rank each express that belief that a parent is obligated to be honest and upstanding because a parent's morality is passed on to his or her children like a disease. And then unreliability of appearances. Over the course of A Doll's House, appearances prove to be misleading that mask the reality of the play's characters and or situations. A couple key characters in this story would be Torvald, Nora, and Krogstad, as well as a couple others that I had mentioned. I found Darwinism in this story because of the occupation versus integrity. Three characters with high positions are unlikable, and there's a quote that reads, "The man on the street might just as well be," which really is represented in this story. And then love versus respect. Torvald loves Nora but does not respect her, and Ibsen comments that respect is just as important as love. For part 2, I chose The Metamorphosis. A little summary would be Gregor works as a traveling salesman in order to provide money for his sister and parents. He wakes up one morning finding himself transformed into an insect. After the metamorphosis, Gregor becomes unable to work and is confined to his room for most of the remainder of the story. Some key characters would be Gregor, Gret, and the father. Some themes of this story would be the absurdity of life, the disconnect between mind and body, and the limits of sympathy. The most important one, I believe, is the disconnect between mind and body because Gregor had to overcome many obstacles throughout this story, and he did them in different ways that nobody else could really imagine, which affected his life greatly. I found Marxism symbolizes a class struggle to break out of a life of being exploited, displayed in the similarity between the causes, natures, and endings of Gregor's transformation, because it did take a toll on himself, his family, and everyone around him, as well as the job he worked. For part 3, I chose How I Became a North Korean by Chris Lee. A summary, the three lives of three young humans converge when they end up fleeing their homes, finding themselves in a small Chinese town across the river from North Korea. They fight to survive in a dangerous place, and they come to form a kind of adoptive family. Some key characters were Yangju, Zhang Mai, and Danny. And then a couple themes that I found in this story were identity and positioning. They kind of had to live their life on their own, and identity became important because of who they were and their citizenship, as well as jumping from border to border and fending for themselves. I found imperialism and Marxism, the difficulty of life for these three because the living conditions in the military force really represented the imperialism. For part 4, I chose A Day on the Road by Lei Q. This is a story about an affair that has sadly run its course. There is nothing that can burst into flames and then be extinguished without a trace so easily as love. And then some key characters are listed, and then the author was actually the narrator, and she referred to herself as I.